Hey, Clint Brown here with Awakened Village, coming back for another episode of Chapter by Chapter. I've got author Emily East on. We're talking about her new book that's coming out called Like a Mother. The last episode was so interesting. Her book is so juicy. We spent the whole first episode in just the intro and preface, which isn't normal. Normally we just sort of dive right in, but there were so many good concepts there. Today we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into this section 1, chapter 1 of the book, and a concept. If you haven't listened to the last episode, go listen to it because it'll help you make sense of this. And if you've got her book and you skip the intro and preface, go back and read it so that we're all on the same page. But we're going to be diving into a little bit of this concept that Emily has of the difference between doing and being. So here's the quote I pulled out of the book. It says, "At the end of the day, the women we are becoming in this thing we call motherhood is more important than what we do." Mm-hmm. So what we're becoming or being, that be verb, is more important than what we do. Emily, can you park there for a little bit and unpack some more of this concept of doing versus being?
Yeah, sure. So by being, I mean like who we are, and I mean the energy that we bring, and I mean the vibration that we emit, and who we are as a person and what we value. That is what I mean by being, and really softening into who we are and who we want to be. And the doing is very much go, 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 do. What am I providing? Very much focused on productivity. And I'm not saying, and within the book, I'm not saying we don't need the do. We need a little bit of do. We need to, anyone who's wrestled a toddler into a car seat knows that we need a little bit of doing. But we also need to focus more on the being. I feel like we're a little bit out of whack with where our focus is, because I think in our society, in our world, what we can see is what we do, and what we can really sink our teeth in is to what we do. And it's very much productivity and what we achieve, and getting things done. And my idea is to, if our goal is to live a joyful life and to raise gorgeous, resilient, game-changing children, we need to shift the metrics of what we measure that by. And I don't feel like it's measured by productivity. I think that it's measured by who we are, who we're becoming, how we embrace our identity, the energy that we bring, and how our children feel when they're in our company. How do our children feel when they're in your company? And that's a really great question to ask. And how do you feel when you're in their company? And if, we do feel stressed sometimes, and we do feel overwhelmed in motherhood, and that's sort of just a given. But I think we can soften that a little bit by bringing down the expectations of ourselves and really measuring how well we're doing by what we're achieving, and bring it back to who we are, and to really ask ourselves, who are we? And what kind of energy do I want to bring? Do I want to bring lightheartedness? Do I want to bring more love? Do I want to bring more joy? And if that's the case, then how? How do I shift from being so, oh my God, this is so freaking hard, I'm so stressed all the time, I'm so angry all the time, I just want to go to bed all the time? How do we make that change? And I think the answer to that question a lot of the times is, well, where's your focus? Is it getting things done? Is it focusing on what you're achieving? Is it, and I think we can get so, because we're always on in our busy lifestyles, we're in each other's faces all the time on social media. We can see what everyone is doing. And, I'm guilty of going, oh, so-and-so is taking their kids to that cool park. That looks really cool. But you know what? Getting my kids out of their pajamas for the day is going to be my achievement, because otherwise, it is like trying to wrestle an alligator getting a toddler dress, and I'm just not up for it today. But sometimes you go, okay, I am going to do it. And there's times when you might feel up to it, and there's times when you're ready to go, and that's great, and you can still do that. And then there's other times when you can soften into going, you know what, if I did it, I'm going to be in tears, they're going to be in tears, and that's not sort of the energy that I sort of want to bring. So it's that focus, it's that shift in focus, and to really sort of ask ourselves those questions: if what energy am I bringing? And it sort of dives right into this concept of co-regulation. And what that means is children can't regulate their own nervous systems. And what that means is if they're anxious, or if they're heightened, or perhaps they're feeling a little bit flat and low, they don't have the ability to bring their nervous system back into equilibrium, back into that, optimal functioning stage where they can, move through those waves of just the day of feeling hot and feeling relaxed. They can't do that themselves. They rely on the adults in their lives and the environments to do that themselves. They feed off us. They're like little parasites, little vultures that feed off our energy, and that's how they regulate. So if I'm dysregulated, if I've just yelled, if I've just screamed, I've just lost my shit, I've spent 40 minutes trying to get these freaking kids dressed and it's just a nightmare, I give up, they're feeding off that energy. Their nervous systems literally mirror, and we have mirror neurons within our system. They're literally mirroring our nervous system. And so there's not to say, if you're listening to this and freaking out, going, oh my God, I'm stressed a lot of the time, I'm anxious all the time, that's okay. We all get there. It's the way that we can bring ourselves back into regulation. So when I lose my shit, how do I bring myself back into regulation? How do I create that flexibility so when I do lose my shit, I can quickly come back into that safe zone and into that regular zone where I can connect and I can be vulnerable and I can be social and I can have those conversations with my children? How do I get there quickly? And that flexibility is also what they learn as well. So if they get dysregulated, they can also come back quickly. So what was your question?
What you made me think. This is why I want to do this show. I said in the last episode that I want to hear the authors camp out on these concepts. They're so juicy. And I feel like sometimes for the sake of being efficient in a book or to meet deadlines, or because how we've all been trained to write, we sort of make it really succinct. And sometimes I want the messy version of it. What I've learned now, I'm 17 years into parenting. My oldest is 17 and a half. And if my kids are acting a certain way and I describe that way, if I give it a label, disrespectful, out of control, crazy, quiet, it's often a very accurate word for something in my world. And more often than not, like you say, even at the age of 17, they're just handing it back to me. They're just holding up a big mirror. And when they're little, they do it with no filter, right? So my 7-year-old will hand an energy right back to me, and I think it's her, and sometimes I incorrectly say, you're being this way, and I have to realize more often than not that or at least have to check myself and say, is she just literally holding up a mirror? And one of the things I've learned that you made me think of was, if I've really lost my cool as a parent because they're just driving me nuts, like today, it's evening for me, morning for you, we're on each side of the globe here. I made a dinner that nobody joined me at. None of them wanted. Which anymore, I almost count as a success. I tell them I want everybody to love it or everybody to hate it, so we're all on the same page. And so it was there, and they all kind of went, and they made peanut butter sandwiches. But if I have a time where I ruin the energy of a car ride, or I lose my cool or whatever, once I've breathed a little bit, I'll say something to them of hey, this last half hour, that was on me. I created this condition. I chose this house. I chose that car. I chose to go to the event. I chose to have 4
Yeah.
of you. Like,
Yeah.
you guys are just along for the ride, and you got stuck in this world I created that fell apart in front of you, and you were collateral damage in it, and I don't blame you. That was on me. And the older ones really get what's going down there, and they're starting to own some of that themselves. When they create drama, they'll say, whoa, sorry, I was having a bad day at school because of this boy or this girl or sports or grades. And so I really like that you have so early in the game. It took me much longer than you to understand that and model some of it so they could see mom, dad doing some self-regulation to reground themselves. So that's really interesting. I had a question on, so you spent a lot of time so far in the book talking about this sort of transition, transformation, paradigm shift, this concept of old to new thing going on. And I wonder, do you think it's possible to make the shift to being without really failing and falling apart doing?
Yes, great question. I think there's a lot of magic in the deepest, darkest, scariest parts of ourselves. And certainly for me, that has been where transformation has happened for me, because it's like, wow, I've just discovered a part of me that I don't really like, and that I'm a bit ashamed to say that is a part of me and I actually didn't really know I had. And for me, it's anger. I have had surprisingly scary bursts of anger, and I'm like, whoa, my kids have pushed me to extremes. I'm sleep deprived. I have expectations that I might get them down for a nap that doesn't happen, or, and I'm just, the navigational shifts in your relationships, your life, your career, like it's a lot. It's a lot. And for me, I've discovered that I have a very deep, fiery, angry part. And I talk about this in the book, and it's cringe for me sometimes to look at it and even to share it, but I think it's really important. There's a story that I tell about how I lost my temper at my son, and I yelled at him and I screamed at him, and I saw, it's hard to share it. I saw his little face sort of like go, whoa. And he was scared. He was scared of me. And, he ran away and hopped into his bed, and it was like, can I swear on here? Because I was like, fuck. I was like, oh, it was a really big wake up call for me to go, oh my goodness, I had no idea I was capable of that. Like, I was just so angry. And, but that has also been a door opening to go, why were you so angry? This is a bit of an invitation for you to transform and to change and to use that fire for good, and to not necessarily go, ugh, I don't like that part of me. That's, it's scary. I don't know it. I want to put it on a very, very tight leash, and I want to keep it buried down. I want to shut the door. I want to keep it in the shadows. But that is exactly how it bursts out of me, because I can't contain it. Motherhood does not give me the privileges of keeping that part of myself in the shadows. And it's like me trying to keep a leash on it just gives those more outbursts. So by creating a healthy relationship with that part of me, now I can use that fire for good. Now I can use that fire because it gives me passion. It gives me determination. It gives me motivation. It gives me energy to fight for what I want. It gives me energy to set boundaries. It gives me energy to say no when I don't want to do something. But having that relationship with it has taken time, and I've actually learned to love that part of me rather than be like, holy fuck, I'm so embarrassed. I cried myself to sleep that night that I screamed. Like, it was an awful experience, but also a very transformative experience as well. So that is a story that I tell in the book as well.
Emily, it makes me think, again, from just being a couple of years ahead of you in parenting, on like that. Thank God mothers have access to that primal anger gear, because anybody who's ever worked around animals knows that, like, when the mom has the babies, you don't mess with the mom. She's very dangerous. I used to live on a ranch, and we had a very docile cow who has calved, will kill you if you get in the pen. Just will stomp you to death. And you're taught that at a young age. Like, when moms are momming, they have a gear, and it's a primal protection, literally gear that they have access to that they probably don't in other times of their life or didn't before. And I think that there's sort of a blessing in the nature cycle of, I could say that as a father, I have certainly found a few of those moments. It happened when my kids were really young, and they don't remember. They have no recollection of me blowing a gasket. I do think, though, it sort of seeds in them. Maybe this is grandiose of me to think, but it's sort of, at least for mothers, I think kids need to know that their mom has that level of passion inside of her. I will say, so I grew up with a brother and a sister. The two of us boys are much older, and I told you, I think in this episode, maybe the last episode, that I work with teenagers for years, and I would tell moms of teenage boys, specifically of boys, that, like, your teenage boy needs to have just like 1 ounce in his brain that says, my mom has a gear that scares the shit out of me.
Oh, I love that.
They need to know that. And it's actually comforting, because it's like, if push came to shove, she could go to bat in a way that, like, is primal. And I remember a story in my life. My brother and I, all three of us kids are quite strong-willed. My brother was rather obstinate. He was probably 14. And my mom had just had it with us, him, the day, whatever. And he said something at the dinner table. Emily, she jumped on the table like an animal on all fours and knocked dinner everywhere, and went nose to nose with him, and was just like, let's go right now. Let's do this. And was just like, he couldn't breathe. I'm getting goosebumps. My dad was just like, and she turned into an animal, but he needed that so desperately. I needed that. My dad needed that. My sister. We needed to see that, like, mom has her limits, and if you cross it, it's not good. But she can access that on somebody else if she had to too. Like, thank God she's got that amount of athleticism and energy available at a moment's notice. And, like, as a teenage boy, you just kind of it turns off the pecking order. It turns off the, like, I'm gonna push mom so far. I was like, I don't know, man. She could probably put me in the emergency room if she had to. She's got some samurai level energy and action that I was unaware of. And boys in particular, in my experience, boys find comfort in the knowing of the pecking order, and knowing that mom has this sort of, like, can hold her own and have a boundary and draw it and hold it, is a really beautiful thing. And so I think it feels like, oh my God, if this was a reality show and somebody saw me do that, they would take my children from me. That's what those moments feel like. When you have your adult temper tantrum because a 32-pound human pushed you too far at 3 a.m. Like, it's sort of ridiculous on paper, but it does happen, is part of the journey. So I appreciate your sharing that. That's very interesting.
I never thought about it like that, but I love that. You're so right. They need to know that you've got the next gear, and you can kick it in and you can protect them. It's almost like when you're talking, I was like imaging like a lioness, like just ready to fight and do what she needs to do. And
it's in all of nature. Like, all of nature has that, and so for anything that rears their young, and we accept it so readily there. We accept it so readily. And then we get to a human female, and we're like, she's out of control. It's like,
Yeah.
sure, if you pushed her that far.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the other thing I think for moms in particular, they got to extend themselves some grace. Lack of sleep is a special mental territory for all of us humans. Long story, very short. Years ago, I had as a client a neuroscience institute that did sleep studies, and they had all the
Mm.
top scientists come from the world and do this big talk. And I'm super nerdy, so I love just sit and listen to scientists do their thing. And this famous doctor got up, and everyone had come to hear him. He was like the keynote. He said that if somebody has been awake 3 days around the clock, this was probably 15 years ago, so we're talking early 2000s, but at that time, they were awake 3 days, 3 nights of no sleep, that there wasn't a neurologist on the planet that could tell the difference between that and schizophrenia.
Mm.
That it's that quick. We can just start to come unhinged in our processing. Parenting is full of lack of sleep. Holy buckets. And broken sleep and 4-hour night, 2-hour night, nap in the warm sun in the car for 5 seconds. It's such disrupted sleep. It's amazing that we don't kill everybody in the process, let alone our children who drive us nuts.
For sure. It's like, how do we do it? We're not meant to. If you put it down on paper, you go, no one would be able to do that.
We do. What is this? I'm gonna click back over to your book, which I got up here. Early copy. Surrender is the new hustle. Why did you choose this word surrender? It's very particular in the English language. It has modern connotations, which may not be and you do a good job of saying, like, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. So what are you getting at with this concept?
Surrender, I think, when people hear surrender, sometimes they feel like it's weak or it's a little bit coward, or you're like putting your white flag up and you're almost giving up.
That's what I was thinking, like the cartoon white flag.
Yeah, but that's not what I mean with surrender. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to surrender. And particularly in parenting, the opposite of surrender, I feel, is control. And particularly in parenthood, we want to control everything. We want everything to be controlled. We don't want our children to hurt. We want them to climb the playground, but we want to control whether they hurt themselves. We want to control what they eat. We just want to control their happiness. We want to make sure that they don't feel any pain. And we just want to control. We have very clear views of what we want them to be doing, how they want to be behaving, and ourselves as well, and the world around us, like not just in relation to our children. It takes the most incredible amount of courage to surrender and let go to those expectations that we have. And I'll use that playground example again, because I feel it's just so relevant. I can watch. I have this memory of when my son was 1. He was only just sort of starting to walk, and he's climbing up the stairs of the playground. And I am like I want to go up, I want to hold his hand, or I want to get him off. I want to control the situation. I don't want him to hurt. But surrender in that situation is by letting what is happening happen, knowing that he's going to be okay. Like, obviously, this isn't life or death situation. I'm surrendering, I'm softening, I am letting him do it. I'm letting life guide. And when he gets to the top of those stairs, Clint, I tell you what, he looks down and he says, I fucking did it. And the smile on his face. And I was like, I was going to stop that because of my issue with control. And it really got me thinking. There's this beautiful book that you're probably aware. It's Michael A. Singer. He's very famous for his book, The Untethered Soul. And he has a second book called The Surrender Experiment. And after reading that, I really asked myself this question. And I asked myself, what are the best things in my life that have happened? What are the best things in my life that have happened? And when I started to name them, none of them was me controlling it. None of them was me saying, this is a vision of where I want to go. That's where I'm going to get it. It was all of them was life guiding me there. And I'll give you an example. I'm a yoga instructor as well. I sort of have my own sort of little business where I teach on a Monday night. It wasn't my goal to go and be a yoga instructor. It was my sister's engagement night. A friend I hadn't seen in years came to the engagement. We had a conversation. The week later, she was going to do a yoga course, and I said, I'll come. And then it's 10 years later, it's led me to my own yoga business. Never would have pictured that. I met my husband in Melbourne, like on a dance floor with hundreds of people in this giant nightclub. Like, I didn't control that. It wasn't a relationship I was chasing. I wasn't chasing after him. I wasn't, it was just life guided us there. And my second son, for example, Knox, I had him quite close to my oldest son is 3, my youngest is 2. They were really close together. He was a surprise. He wasn't something, we weren't actively trying to get pregnant then. And he's the best thing. Like, he changed the course of my life. Like, I was going down, before him, I was going down a very corporate business venture. And it wasn't till him that I directed. Now I've written this book. I'm going down sort of more the holistic sort of side of things. And this was more spiritual wellness. And I didn't control any of those things. So I think that's just a really great question to ask, is to go, what are the best things in your life that have happened, and to really reflect on that, and to go, okay, maybe I can trust a little bit. Maybe I can trust in life. Maybe I can trust in this universe, and maybe I can open and relax myself a little bit to go, maybe there is something bigger in my life that I can't see or that I can't envision. But that is fucking scary. Letting that go, letting go of control, letting go of any expectations is scary, and it takes bravery and it takes courage to do. And it's not like, I used to think, surrender, like, you're just going to go with the flow, like dead fish go with the flow. Like, I'm not a dead fish. I know where I'm going, and I'm going to squeeze this life dry. I'm determined to do this, X, Y, and Z. It's not like that. It's not like I can still surrender and be a determined person. I can still surrender and be really motivated. But what that means is, when I'm faced with a challenge, I can soften into it and pivot. I can pivot when I need to, and I can also not get stuck in the mud trying to make things happen that perhaps aren't meant to, or, trying to force things to happen. And I think that's where we get stuck into that toxic side of that productivity and that control, is we can still have a little bit of it, but too much of it. And I think it's been preached in our society for far too long. Like, we've had enough. We don't have to be responsible all the time. We don't have to be motivated all the time. We can. It actually takes a lot of bravery to let things flow. And when we let things flow, in my experience, doors have opened up for me, because I energetically, I've got room for them. Like, it's like, you wouldn't buy a new couch if you didn't have anywhere to put it. So it's almost like letting go, clearing out some space, making room for things, so that you have space for things that you might not necessarily know that you need space for, but just energetically to create that. So that's what I mean by surrender and control. And we live very much in this hustle, hustle, hustle. So I feel like surrender is the new hustle. And I feel like when we do that, life flows and it feels better. It's more joyful. I actually get more done, and I'm not gritting my teeth and like really clinging onto what I think should be done.
Yeah. There's so many visuals you're making me think of, and maybe for anybody who's sort of adventurous, I think of like, if you spend any time in nature, What you're talking about is rewilding. What you're talking about is understanding the flow of nature, from my perspective, because nature does go with the flow. Things aren't forced. There's not the mechanism to sort of synthetically force something to happen. That's all human doing, in a modern society. And I think about, if you've ever learned to skateboard or snowboard or surf or ride a bike, you have to surrender to that experience. You cannot control all of it. You actually will fall off,
Yeah.
right? It's not actually even physically possible to sort of manhandle the experience. Or if you've ever rock climbed or swam in the ocean, you submit to it and you surrender, and then the freedom opens up. If something as simple, I took my kids to the ocean for the first time a few years ago, and I tried to explain to them, like, okay, it's big, and what you learn in the swimming pool's roughly helpful, but why don't you just get the flow of it, and it's going to do its thing, and you get to become a part of it, whether you like it or not. You get to join wherever it's headed. And that was shocking to them, one, how powerful it was, but just learning to sort of embrace it, and the switch from fear to joy when they just were like, oh, you can just like turn towards shore and let it sort of push you and do the thing. I think about, in my strange existence, I've done a couple of rescuing humans from rivers. And so I've had to jump into some fast rivers a few times when I'm out and about in the mountains and people are being stupid. And what's interesting about a river is that the safe way to deal with the river is to go with the flow of the water. You have to turn and go with the flow, because then you become you regain all of your freedom in going with the river. If you face upstream, you have no freedom, because you're spending all your time just trying to like keep your head afloat, where you could turn around and do nothing almost, and it'll take you, and then you can plan, then you can move. Humans are, I think our generation, I'm older than you, but I think we're both in the millennial cohort, are seeing the undoing of this false narrative that humans are in control. And we're realizing in our lives that our parents tried really hard to control everything, and maybe their parents did. And now we're realizing that there is some ebbs and flows to it, and learning to embrace those, that that may be where the freedom comes from in the process. Not from it all going our way, whatever that is.
Yes, 100%.
I made a note here about, you talk about rewilding a little bit so far in the book, and isn't this just what you're talking about, is sort of returning to nature, going with the flow, and stopping with this sort of synthetic sense of control that we have?
And I think so I'm sort of also referring to coming back to yourself a little bit too, and when we talk about society and the control that humans like to have, and particularly mothers, we're put in a very particular box, and we're expected to behave a certain way. We're expected our children to behave a certain way, and it's time to lean away from the path that was paved for us, and to understand and to relearn our own. And that's what I mean by rewild, is I mean, like, not just go recklessly wild, but to go back to our own roots, and to go back to what we were born for. We were born with this blueprint, with this inherent blueprint of these amazing gifts that we have to share. And then as we grow up, we forget, because we're conditioned into ways that we feel like we should behave or should act. And then rewilding is actually remembering and going back to who we are and back to our gifts. And I think that's why it's so important to invite our emotions in. And when I was talking about anger earlier, that's an invitation to listen to your instincts, and to not get cut off from them, because I think that in our society we're cut off from our instincts because we have expectations that not just society puts on us, but we put expectations on ourselves as well. And one of those expectations is to not get angry. Or at least if you do, don't tell anyone, don't show anyone, because it makes you a bad mom, or it's like a bit cringe. Whereas connecting with that part is connecting with my intuition. And when I'm connected to my intuition, that's sort of that rewilding. It's I can ignore the outside noise and actually just be me. And that's when I have that freedom. That's when I parent my best. In that sense too.
Emily, I'm so satisfied that we decided to do these interviews. This is so interesting. I think I want to go ahead and wrap up this first chapter. I'm excited for the next one. We're going to dive into chapter 2, which right now is entitled Flexible Identity, Defined Purpose.
Yes.
I'm excited to sort of unpack that in the next episode. Thank you so much for having the presence of mind to write these things down, and then being brave enough to put it out there for other people to see with the vulnerability that you have. I imagine that there's going to be more than a few people who, mothers or not, are going to find clarity. I think that I have a friend that's a crime novelist, and I said, "What's your ultimate goal in writing a crime novel? Like, how do you know if you won? Like, what is that? How do you know that you did it?" And he said, "My only goal as a writer is to speak unspoken truths. I want someone to read it and be like, oh, that's the words. That's the words. They did it in the sentence. They said the phrase." And I think your book has so many of those where someone's going to be like,
"Thank you.
That's how I tell it to my sister. That's how I say this thing."
Yeah,
I think you got a real gift for those unspoken truths. So I'm excited for the folks listening to this. Look in the show notes or links below, wherever this is. This is going to be on a bunch of platforms. So that you can link over to Emily's stuff. Emily is available online. Reach out. This is a real human doing the real thing. Emily, I'm sure you'd love to connect with people who are reading your stuff.
Absolutely.
And got questions and whatnot. Thank you so much for taking time to go through this chapter by chapter with me. I'm excited to get into the rest of it. And it just keeps getting juicier and juicier as we go along. So I'm really thrilled to dive into all the rest of this with you.
Thank you very much, Clint. Happy to be here and talk soon.
All right. See ya.